Time is one of the most important assets you have as a storyteller. The way you decide to show and manipulate time is key to not only your audience understanding your story, but enjoying it. So today we're going to talk about time, how it's expressed in movies directly, indirectly, how we structure time and manipulate it. I'm going to show you how to become the god of your story's universe. So let's get into it. The simplest and most straightforward way time is expressed in movies is with text inserts. They'll state the time, or sometimes you'll see a shot of a clock or a calendar to show you what time it is. A good example of this is the old classic Western movie High Noon. A guy who recently gets married in this old Western town. He gets himself into some trouble with a local gang, and he has until noon to either get out of town or face a gang of killers. In that movie, it takes place in real time, and they're constantly showing us a shot of a clock as it gets closer and closer to noon. So very simple, straightforward way to show time in your movie is by showing what time it is, either with text inserts or a clock. Time can also be expressed indirectly by a change in the actor's wardrobe and their appearance, or maybe you show a day and night cycle. This is, I think, a little more subtle and tasteful way to show the passage of time. Or no change. No change means that the movie is in the moment and taking place in real time. Or maybe you have a combination of all these things. So I'm going to run you through some quick examples to show you how different movies handle time flow. So the first movie I want to talk about is Castaway, starring Tom Hanks. He plays a FedEx delivery person who survives a plane crash and gets stranded on a deserted island for years. So how do you take a movie that's shot in a couple months, it portrays years of somebody's life, and condense it all into 2 hours? This movie has a huge gap, so they use a text insert, but there's also a makeshift calendar that the character uses to keep track of time, and we also see a lot of change in the character, from the way he looks, his beard, his hair's overgrown, to his behavior. He goes from this naive plane crash victim to the ultimate survival guy. These are all easy, simple, maybe obvious ways to express time, but you're going to see that this can get pretty complicated. So another quick example I want to talk about is the Back to the Future trilogy. You got the high schooler Marty McFly, played by Michael J. Fox. He hooks up with this scientist and they travel back in time and have all these adventures. One of the reasons why that movie is so fun is because of time expression. They travel to all these different years and alternate timelines, and it's so fun to see these same characters in alternate situations, and not to mention all the changes in the appearance, the technology, the clothes, all the funky clothes. Just a super fun movie to watch. Definitely one of Spielberg's top films. So for my last example, I want to talk about the Steve Jobs movie, directed by Danny Boyle. This one is a little bit more complicated. We have a biopic that spans somebody's whole adult life. So it's a very long time span. The director decides to split the entire movie into just 3 big scenes. All the scenes are similar. It's a product launch. Steve Jobs is launching the original Macintosh in the first act. Act 2, he's launching the next computer. And in the final act and climax, he's launching the iMac. But because they occur in different moments of Steve Jobs' life, there's huge changes from the way he looks and dresses to his behavior, the way he treats other characters, his relationship with other characters. It's an excellent movie and a great example of expressing time, structuring time in a narrative, and how much more it adds to your movie when the passage of time is well thought out like this. Another example is Notting Hill. There's a great scene in that movie where Hugh Grant's character is walking through a marketplace and the seasons are changing, so some of the scenic elements are changing in the background, and the weather changes. Cool way to show how much time is going by in your movie. You can also use a change in the color palette to show the passage of time. For example, the movie The Aviator. Martin Scorsese creates a timeline out of a color palette. If you look at the first hour of that movie, everything is in shades of red or cyan blue. So it gives the film this kind of like teal grade to it. The shot of the golf course with the aqua greens. I love it. And they did this because they wanted it to match the film stock of that era. And as the movie goes into the 30s, 40s, and 50s, that palette slowly goes away. Another example of this is Breaking Bad. Every scene that takes place in Mexico, you're going to notice they use a super warm yellow tint in the color grade. That's because they wanted to give Mexico like this otherworldly feel to it. I thought it worked very well. So that is the way time is expressed in movies, directly and indirectly. But there's other ways to show the passage of time. You can use what they call a montage. This is a series of separate but related shots that are edited together to create a continuous sequence. The montage allows filmmakers to communicate large amounts of information over a shorter time span. It's basically a way to compress time. So to give you an example of this, the movie Rocky, okay, the training sequence, classic montage. Another example of this is the movie Scarface, Push It to the Limit. I love that movie. And I grew up in Miami, so I see right through that fake Cuban accent. Eso no cubano de verdad. But I still love that movie. Another drug dealing movie, Blow. They have a great montage and they use stills and photographs. They got that awesome Blinded by the Light song, Wrapped Up Like a Douche. And that's the rule for montages, okay? You either gotta have cool music or a cool voiceover. Sticking to our drug theme, another example is Requiem for a Dream. You cannot talk about a montage without bringing up this movie because they just use it so well. They have those extreme close-ups with the real cool sound effects. I'm going to bring up Requiem for a Dream a couple times in this video because that movie is a masterclass of time manipulation in film. So, moving away from the montage, another similar way to show the passage of time in your movies is the time lapse. A time lapse is a technique where frames are shot at a much slower rate and then played back at normal speed. Now, this is used less often, but I still think it's a great way to show time flow. For example, Requiem for a Dream. They have great time lapses in that film of the old lady who is hooked on pills and speed. And she's going around her whole apartment cleaning up, them getting high and partying, and it shows all this craziness. Another example of time lapses is the Danny Boyle movie, 127 Hours. It's about a guy who has his arm caught in a boulder while hiking. That movie has great time lapses in the intro and in another scene when he's caught in the boulder, he's retracing his steps, and they have a great time lapse there too. What's cool about this one is that it's not a static frame, so it's a series of stills but moving, so it's kind of like a hyperlapse, but the frame is changing height. It's a very choppy, bumpy, sloppy time lapse, but it fits because he's on a hike and it just works, okay? So those are all the ways that we can express time in movies. I want to talk about structuring time now. The two main ways you're going to structure time in your movie is linear or non-linear. Linear movies are chronological. They show action in a logical, sequential manner. Non-linear narratives is when the story takes place out of order, leaving you, the viewer, to have to piece together what's going on. The most famous example of this is Pulp Fiction. This movie made the non-linear narrative cool. This story is told completely out of order. We have multiple protagonists, each with their own storylines. Tarantino decides to separate them into different chapters using title headings. Many of the supporting characters show up in other storylines, and some of the actions in one storyline affect the other. Just a brilliant film, and definitely the film that made the non-linear narrative popular. While non-linear narratives could add a lot of intrigue to your story, a non-linear narrative really needs to be well executed, and there needs to be a strong justification for putting your story out of order. So when you're writing a non-linear story, I think it's very important to ask yourself, why are you putting your story in a non-linear format? That's the first question you have to ask, because it does add a lot of complexity and it makes it way harder for audiences to follow along. If you're going to make your story non-linear, it should serve the story. A great example of this is one of my favorite movies of all time is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, starring Jim Carrey and my childhood crush Kate Winslet. This is like a soft sci-fi romance movie that follows a couple who is in love with each other, but they break up and they undergo a procedure to have their memories erased. And that movie is told completely out of order, but it fits the narrative. You have this person who's going through a procedure where he's having his memories erased. So we're jumping back and forth to all the different memories. And remember how I told you earlier how you can use a character's appearance to establish time? This movie, which is non-linear and jumps around in time, it uses no text inserts or title headings or nothing. The director uses Kate Winslet's hair color to indicate where we're at in the story. When the couple first meets, her hair is green, which is a springtime color. It represents new beginnings. Then as the relationship grows, her hair changes to red, which represents the passion that they have for each other. Then as that passion slowly fades, her hair fades in color, and we have this more orange, auburn kind of look. So every time we see Kate Winslet with that hair color, we know that the couple is on the verge of breaking up. And then after she has her brain erased, her hair color turns to blue, which represents just a blank slate. Just filmmaking magic, okay? Just a great example of a non-linear narrative that's very well executed. Another example I want to bring up is 500 Days of Summer. This is another romance movie about a couple breaking up. In this movie, we start off with a couple sitting in a bench holding hands. We see an engagement ring on her. This is actually the last scene of the movie. We start off there, and then the movie takes us through all the ups and downs of the relationship. The director uses text inserts to indicate where they're at on the timeline. And at the end of the movie, which is also the first scene of the movie, where they're holding hands on the park with an engagement ring, we learn that Zooey Deschanel's character is actually engaged to somebody else. And the guy doesn't get the girl at the end. But this was a great surprise because the movie starts off with them holding hands and we see that engagement ring. So while they're going through all their ups and downs, we assume they're going to end up together because that's what we saw in the beginning. But because Mark Webb structured the story in that way, it really made for a surprise ending. So when you do a non-linear story, forcing your audience to piece together this kind of puzzle narrative, it has to be well executed and it has to offer something new and some new perspective, or there has to be a good reason why you're putting your story non-linear. You can't just do it for the hell of it, all right? You're not Tarantino. So, moving on. 99% of the movies out there are going to be linear or non-linear. Time is like an arrow. It's always going in one direction. But on the rare occasion, you can have a movie that's completely backwards. For example, the 2002 film Irreversible. This movie was directed by one of these French weirdos. It follows the story of a woman who gets raped, but the entire movie, the flow of the action is all backwards. The beginning is actually the end, and then the end is the beginning. And this movie is shockingly gruesome. There's a scene where there's a fight, and a guy gets his arm broken. Then he gets his head smashed by a fire extinguisher. Here's some footage of some baby seals. Okay, that was tough. But yeah, you can have a movie that's totally backwards. Another way to structure your narrative is by using time loops. The old time loop movie. I love this kind of movie. This is a story structure where your characters re-experience a certain span of time over and over again. The most famous example of this is Groundhog Day. Bill Murray's character, he plays this TV anchor who is covering this Groundhog Day event, and he finds out that every day he wakes up, he's reliving the same day over and over again, and nothing he does can break the cycle. Eventually, he falls in love with this girl, and as he tries to pick her up, he keeps failing. But each time the scenario is repeated, he learns more and more about her, and eventually he gets the girl and wakes up, and it's the next day. But yeah, that is a time loop movie. Another example of this style of movie is Source Code. This is a great science fiction movie directed by Duncan Jones, who is David Bowie's son. Pretty cool. But yeah, this movie is probably my favorite time loop movie. The screenplay is amazing. The movie's about an Air Force captain played by Jake Gyllenhaal who wakes up in a train that is about to explode. Then we find out that this is a mission that he's a part of to try to uncover who the terrorist was that blew up the train. So they digitally recreate the train explosion. So this scenario is being played over and over again. Each time he's learning something new about the passengers on board. Yeah, it's an excellent, excellent movie full of surprises and twists. So highly recommend. But that is my favorite time loop movie. The next example I want to talk about is the ultimate time loop movie, but it also incorporates a lot of the ideas that I've been talking about in this video, and that is Run Lola Run. This is a German experimental film released in 1999, and it's about a woman who needs to come up with a large sum of money in 20 minutes to save her boyfriend's life. Our protagonist Lola is stuck in a time loop. There's clear-cut goals, high stakes, high urgency. The cinematography is incredible. We're constantly shown a clock to indicate the passage of time. The editor uses these beautiful split screen montages, and there's like this cool butterfly effect they do where Lola is rushing to save her boyfriend and she runs into different people on the way, and we're shown their future through these montages. Just incredible filmmaking that no words can describe. You're just gonna have to watch the movie. So the last thing I want to talk about is flashbacks and flash forwards. Flashbacks and flash forwards are short scenes where the story breaks continuity to jump backwards or forwards in time. A flashback shows you what led up to this moment, or if it's a flash forward, then it shows you what this moment may lead to. And like non-linear stories, I think flashbacks and flash forwards should have a clear purpose and justification for why they're being used. If you have to offer the audience some new perspective or give them a sense of appreciation, for example, the movie Saving Private Ryan. That movie opens up with a flashback. We start off In the present day, this old man is visiting the D-Day memorial at Normandy. And then we flash back to Captain Miller on June 6, 1944. That Omaha beach scene is probably the greatest battle scene ever filmed. We then go through all the narrative, and then at the end, we flash back to the memorial, and we find out that old man is actually Ryan. And the movie ends. A lot of people wondered, why even bother with that flashback? Why not just have the story start off at D-Day and that's it? Well, there's two reasons Spielberg included the flashback. One is because I think it makes Captain Miller's death hit harder, because you thought he was gonna live because you're thinking that he was that old man from the beginning. And two is because that scene with the old man in the memorial, where you see his family behind him and he's in tears, that is almost like a thank you. That family in the background, that represents us. It's about the future generations thanking the greatest generation for the sacrifices they made. That's why he included that scene. So that is it. That is the video. I've been your host, Elaine Navas. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and go write some amazing stories.
Sorry.